Everybody, what's up? Trooper here with Throoper as usual, and today we've got a very special guest, lawyer Josh Marcus from MKM Esports. How's it going, Josh?
What's up, Josh?
Doing great, Troopers. How are you?
Oh, we're good. We're always good.
I love the way that he addressed us. No one's thought of that before, so I appreciate that.
I must be the first.
Yeah, you actually are. You actually are. You just got creative bonus points. But today, guys, obviously, you know, the biggest discussion going on in the Fortnite community, the biggest in almost all of gaming, actually, and all of esports, is this FaZe TFue debacle. So we thought that it would be an interesting episode for you guys to kind of get an actual lawyer on here, somebody who actually understands this stuff and can kind of break down what is going on, at least to the extent of the knowledge that's publicly available right now, so we can kind of talk about all that and really get to the bottom of this for you guys, or at least as the best we can. So Josh, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, you know, how you got into esports law and what you do currently, you know, who you work with and all that sort of thing, to kind of let the fans know who you are and why they should be listening to you here.
Yeah, absolutely. So myself and my business partner, Evan Cubis, we launched Canada's first law firm and management agency dedicated exclusively to esports and content creators. So we operate here out of Toronto. And on the legal side, we represent tournament organizers, documentary filmmakers, teams, players, kind of you name it in the esports space. Mostly in corporate law, but we do contracts, litigation, IP all around. So of course, we're keeping a close eye on all this recent news. On the agency side, we represent about 250 content creators, gamers, venues, ancillary entities. And that's all done through our new company called Rumble Gaming. So a lot going on, and you know, it's definitely a fun industry to be launching in.
Yeah, definitely. It's got to be, you know, like doing law in oil and gas or something, right?
Absolutely. Well, I started in insurance law, so this is this is a step up for sure.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like it. But with that many content creators and people that you guys work with, you know, I think it's a fairly safe bet for everybody to make that you guys have seen your fair share of contracts. You know your way around, you know, what the esports industry standard is, if there even is such a thing, really. We can kind of get into that. But definitely a great source for us to rely on here to kind of break some of this down for us and really figure out what's going on. So I think we should just get right into it and start with, you know, what happened. So TFue, if you're watching this show, there's like a negative chance that you don't know who this is. But just in case you have been living under some rock and somehow found this by happy accident.
It's all the insurance lawyers tuning in.
He's one of the biggest content creators in Fortnite. He represents FaZe Clan, which is one of the biggest and longest standing, and honestly, to date, it's been one of the more prestigious esports organizations that there is. You know, I'd have FaZe right up there with, you know, the Optics, the Cloud9s, TSM, CLGs. You know, they're a big fish. So it's a huge partnership, huge news, obviously. And his allegations essentially boil down to a couple of things. The first is that 80% of his money was being taken, which obviously, you know, it sounds like an egregious amount. And I think we could probably all agree to that you shouldn't have 80% of your money taken. You know, we can get into actually what's happening, more specifics in a little bit. But the allegation is that FaZe is taking 80% of his money and that they are prohibiting him from doing work with other brands, other people, and just making money for himself in general, and that he's essentially being owned by FaZe Clan, and they kind of use him as a puppet. They tell him what to do, and they make all the money, and he just does all the work. This is what the essential allegation is. Obviously, you know, in esports, it wouldn't be esports if we didn't get an immediate response from the other side, and we get both sides on the table immediately, which, again, we can talk about how much sense that makes. But we have the allegations response here from FaZe Clan that we can pull up for you guys, their official wording here. So what they've said is that we're shocked and disappointed to see the news of his press article and lawsuit, TFue's. Over the course of our partnership with him, which began in April of 2018, so just over a year ago now, FaZe Clan has collected $0 from tournament winnings, Twitch revenue, YouTube revenue, or any social platform. In fact, we've only collected a total of $60,000 from this partnership, while TFue has earned millions as a member of FaZe. While contracts are different with each player, all of them, including TFue's, have a maximum of 20% to FaZe Clan in both tournament winnings as well as content revenue, with 80% to the player. In Turner's case, which is TFue's real name, neither of those have been collected by FaZe Clan. We're proud of what we've accomplished together over the past year with Turner, and will continue to support him. So their original response, very positive. interesting that they would have a contract that would entitle them to take a bunch of money, and then them saying they take nothing. I'm kind of that
little bit of some backpedaling that we've been seeing.
That makes me scratch my head.
Well, it also, when you respond right away, and if I were FaZe's lawyer, you want to put a stop to that right away. I'll tell you right now that statement there certainly wasn't drafted by a lawyer. Even the wording that they use, over the course of this partnership, FaZe has collected $0 from Twitch partnerships or from Twitch streaming. No, FaZe has collected, I haven't seen any numbers. I guarantee you they've collected more than $1 over the course of that partnership. And that could just seem like semantics, but that's the type of early response that will come back to bite them down the line in court. I would say even putting that $60,000 figure on it is shocking. Why would you even attempt to monetize or to put an amount on that money in dispute? As soon as you're shown that you're paid out $60,001, your credibility goes right out the window.
Well, definitely not the greatest start for FaZe, and unfortunately they didn't stop there. We actually saw that they responded to that original post themselves and gave a couple of other posts here. So, again, after hearing the community feedback, they want to address FaZe Clan taking 80% of his brand deal earnings. So here they actually did, they released the direct clause from TFue's contract, apparently. And it says that brand deals featuring the gamer that exist on gamer or on companies' content creation platforms, examples Twitch, YouTube, or social media sites, if the deal is brought to the gamer by the company, 20% to the gamer and 80% to the company. So this basically says, and Josh, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in layman's terms, I think what this says is that if the company is the one who secures the sponsorship, they get 80% of the profit, or 80% of the revenue. That's correct?
Correct.
Okay. And again, another weird statement, because they say, let us be clear, we've never collected any of this from TFue or any other FaZe Clan member, which makes you wonder, why is this in a contract in the first place then? Is it to make them seem like they're being really nice guys? Because hey, look, we know there's this terrible clause in your contract, but we're not going to uphold it. What? Can you weigh in on this, Josh? Why would you have a clause like this if you're not using it, apparently?
Yeah, I mean, you have to remember, FaZe Clan has a lot of contracts out there, and when we're going through these negotiations, lawyers will generally start with a precedent, especially if it's for that same client or same company. So, FaZe is not, they could rewrite their contract whenever, a lawyer or an agent makes an issue of something. But they're taking that contract as is. And those are generally the numbers that I guess they use for everyone, and nobody negotiated that down. I think this goes to something which I'll repeat throughout this whole episode. If you're a gamer and you're watching and you have a contract in front of you, have somebody look over it. We offer pro bono, no charge services to gamers to read their contracts. I know there are a lot of lawyers down in the States who do too. If you contact me, I will point you in their direction. But have somebody read over the contracts, because that's really what the problem is with this. Nobody thought of it.
That's kind of alarming.
It is alarming. And I mean, look, you hear, I would say, from lawyers who tend to work more with gamers, and, full disclosure, aside from the pro bono services, I work with a lot of teams as well. What you're hearing from them is you're pushing that 80-20 split, which I think everybody can agree is too much. But the response that the lawyers get when they try to negotiate this is, well, this is how it's done in the industry. Which is true to some degree. I haven't seen anything that's an 80-20 split in favor of a team, but there are a lot of crappy contracts out there, and I don't blame teams for trying to monetize on their assets, and that's what these are. They're assets, gamers, team members. But at a certain point, you have to treat your staff right, and that's what they are.
Yeah. Definitely. So what is a more common split? If 80-20 isn't very personable, let's just say, and it sounds like it's not very common either. What is a more common split that you see?
Well, I should say, this one particular clause that they've highlighted here, it's brand deals that, yes, are brought to them by the team, and frankly, most of their brand deals are going to be brought to them by the team. But that's only one clause in this. The rest of the contract, as I've seen it, is more in line with the industry standard, which is generally 80% to the player, 20% to the team for things like tournament winnings, which again, FaZe has said they haven't collected on. And 50-50 is actually still quite common. I think gamers don't want to hear it, but teams do need to make money, and they are investing in their talent. So it's expected that the team is going to take a cut. 80-20 in favor of the company is too much. It's usually the other way around, but I wouldn't go over 50-50.
Okay. And I think it's an important distinction here that you made, that this is for a very specific type of deal, right? Where the brand actually goes out, negotiates, does all the legwork to secure the sponsorship, talks to another brand, where somebody like FaZe Clan goes and we're talk to a Samsung or a Logitech or a Razer, like, hey, listen, here's our team, here's our social media reach, blah, 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 blah. We can have this one player named TFue. He's super popular. We can work a specific deal with him where he does stuff for you. And then because they've done all that work, they get to keep 80% of that. It's...
Yeah. I mean, take a TV commercial, right? A cable commercial. If FaZe Clan wanted to, produce their own commercial, put it out on cable network, and derive some income from that, it would make sense that only 20% would go to TV, right? He shows up, he gets filmed, right? You get a little bit of money. We're the ones putting in the effort. And I don't think it would be that egregious in that scenario. If you're talking about kind of your standard sponsorship where they're tweeting 5-10 times and mentioning sponsors on air, then yeah, 80-20, seems a little high considering the talent's doing all the work. But I think it's really that contextual approach that, at least as a lawyer, I'm looking forward to seeing a court comment on, taking that contextual approach and saying, you know what, it's not as cut and dry as we're just going to call everything 80-20 or 50-50, because it's a new area. This is part of influencer marketing. This is part of the new generation of people consuming media. It's a shift in the approach we have to really look at these contracts and the issues that we have to be cognizant of as lawyers advising on these contracts.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because as we know, everything in esports is moving so fast, faster than a lot of people can even keep up with. So when stuff like this happens, a lot of people also have to take into account, like you say, it's time for a lot of people to kind of put their focus on these contracts. You have to hash these things out, because this is kind of in a Wild West scenario where people might be getting taken advantage of if they're not reading the fine print, because a lot of these players are younger. They're impressionable because they want to be professionals. So if an organization comes along, they're going to think that they're going to help them. And in TFue's case, I'm pretty sure he was with FaZe for a long time. He was a professional player, I believe, on H1Z1 and a couple other Battle Royale games. I believe PUBG. I'm not sure, though, but he was on FaZe far before he blew up on Fortnite and had these insane stream numbers. But now he's in this position where he's like pretty much one of the top streamers on Twitch, I would say, besides Ninja. He's up there with Ninja and Shroud as like the top content creators and the people that pull in the most subs. So now he has this opportunity where all these other sponsors and endorsements are coming his way, but now he realizes he's realizing and finally has this hindsight, essentially, where he should probably have made better choices. And he realized maybe that it's not going to be that easy. So he just wants to try and get out as soon as possible. Probably just trying to, recoup on his mistakes a little bit. But, it's easy to get complacent for a while. And then when you hit a certain position like him, I can see why you might notice like, hey, I can definitely be getting a lot more on my own. And at this point, I seem to be, you guys seem to be benefiting off of me more than I seem to be benefiting off of you.
Yeah, I mean, it's just hard to know when that transition happened, though, right? Because it does seem like, Ninja
happens
pulled
so
it up
fast
on his stream. He showed his that chart of TFue's like viewers and stuff like that, and you see the day he signs FaZe Clan, it just goes like this. It's like this gigantic. So, like at a certain point, maybe now it makes more sense for him to be getting the money, but originally. Right. Would he even be in this position were it not for FaZe Clan and FaZe Clan giving him access to all of their original reach? Because the hardest thing as a streamer or content creator is getting over that original bump, right? It's much easier to get from 1,000 to 10,000 viewers than it is to get from 0 to 1,000.
Absolutely.
As weird as that sounds.
100%. A lot of people don't even remember that when Courage, who's one of the top Fortnite streamers right now, he went from esports casting in Call of Duty right into full-time streaming. but he got picked up by Optic Gaming under their brand as a content creator. He was on there for probably like a month, and he blew up so quickly that he essentially surpassed them in branding, to where he wanted to focus more on his own. And then he was able to get all these other endorsements once he got out of that contract. So he was able to, realize that soon enough. When you have somebody like TFue who's a lot younger, I can see why it might take a little bit of time. But, now's the time to really put the focus on that. And I think, this is such a big story, not just Fortnite, but esports as a whole. Like, this is something that a lot of players might need to double check on.
Absolutely. But, I would just wonder, at what point or what protections are there for the organizations, though, or the teams, right? You have teams who are investing a lot of money and a lot of resources into growing that talent and getting them over that initial bump, as you said. And a lot of these organizations, quite frankly, are, if you look at the investment market, they are attracting investors at 15 times their revenue, which I have to tell you is pretty ludicrous. And exactly. And the investment community is scratching their heads trying to figure it out. And, it's fine. It's hard to put a value on these organizations because we know that there's going to be growth. But at the same time, people expect teams to make money at some point. And if they don't make money, that is going to hurt the industry because you're going to need someone to hire these players, right? And to pay them. So, there has to be a balance, and you have to have some rights to players and their content. Otherwise, you're not going to sign them. Why bother?
Yeah. Especially when you think about all the stuff like an organization like FaZe Clan does do for its players. I mean, they have these elaborate gaming houses out in Los Angeles or California, these beautiful houses in a beautiful spot where everybody wants to live. They usually have professional chefs or cooks that can kind of cook meals. A lot of the times they'll help you. I know this was like something that Optic was really famous for, is that they helped build your brand up, right? They wanted you to become your own brand, but they taught you everything that they knew. They're like, we're going to teach you everything that took us however long between the inception of Optic and you getting here. We're going to teach all that to you as fast as we can rather. And then maybe you'll learn more stuff on your own, and then that's great. But it's almost, to me, it almost is a sign of the immaturity of some of the people in the industry overall, and just how young everybody is, that it's like, well, I'm bigger than you now, I don't need you anymore. It's like, yeah, but that's like spitting in your parents' face, as soon as you make a little bit of extra money or something, and it's like, hey, we've kind of fed you and clothed you and did everything for like 18 years. You could be at least a little bit grateful, right? Like,
no, 100%.
So yeah, I completely see that the teams are in a tough spot here, because a lot of teams actually been, I don't know if you can comment on this, Josh, but I've heard that teams are actually running player revenue through top line revenue, which essentially means that they're claiming all individual player revenue as like their revenue. And then is that true?
Well, yeah. I mean,
oh God.
The way these contracts are generally structured is a player is an independent contractor, and whether or not they qualify as one is something that, is going to be for the courts to decide. But for now, they're an independent contractor, which means if I'm a team owner, I have all my contractors out there and they're making money, and that's going to me, and I'm paying out my contractors based on what they earn. So I'm paying them their 80%, their 20%, their 50%, what have you. Yes, it's happening. Frankly, I mean, I don't necessarily see that as a problem. I think personally, I see why it simplifies things on the organization side, right? You avoid issues like income tax, like workers' compensation, right? It's, maybe not the best for gamers, but at the same time, it could be a necessary evil. If we start bringing in players as employees or some alternative, which might be necessary, you just open up a whole other can of worms. So is it a question of which one's better? Who knows?
And that's honestly becoming more standard, not just in esports, but pretty much everywhere. You see companies everywhere today trying, especially in the US, where, healthcare wasn't as mandated, and all these coverages and things weren't as mandated by companies previously. And then, new administrations came in. I believe it was the Obama administration that really started forcing, like, hey, you got to, provide this, and you got to get health insurance for your employees, and you got to provide this and X and Y and Z. And then all of a sudden a company goes, well, wait a second, that like doubles the cost of my employee essentially. Yep. So if they can't double their productivity, which, most people are already working hard, it's not like you can just do that, then at a certain point, it makes more sense to keep them as an independent contractor, which which is just, I feel like that's just a sign of the times overall. Like that's just a symptom of 2019 more
Yeah.
so than it is esports.
You know, that part doesn't concern me so much as, you know, I would still like to see some protections. You know, I think everybody is going to talk about the need for a player union after this, which has its own set of difficulties. Whether that comes from the courts, whether that comes from, you know, a government enacting laws, or ideally, you know, it'll come internally and we'll see more of a culture shift. You know, I'm not a huge fan of the franchise model that we see in Overwatch or League of Legends, but to their credit, you know, this adds a little more consistency, a little more predictability. You know how much players are going to be paid. They, you know, are getting the benefits that are set out in the contract. There's a lot of oversight from the developers, probably too much. But at the same time, you know, like I said, it's a little more predictable. So that you know, could be another way around all of this.
Yeah, definitely. We've actually got someone in the chat, Adamant Gamer, who's kind of made two different points. So the first he said is that apparently the reason for all of this starting is that HyperX came and offered TFue a buttload of money, and he was unable to accept it with FaZe Clan due to FaZe Clan's existing sponsors. Because it's one thing, you know, it'd be one thing for FaZe Clan to say, hey, you can't work with anybody unless we approve it and say okay. It's another thing for FaZe Clan to say, hey, listen, we're signed with Astro, so you can't rep another headset company.
Exactly.
Because, right, those are two completely different conversations.
No, and that's a good point.
They're not saying, hey, you can't go get sponsored by Hot Pockets or something. They're saying you can't get sponsored by somebody that directly competes with one of the guys that's already paying our bills, because our bills are how we have this house and how we have all this other stuff, right? So, I mean, if that is really the case, obviously this is a rumor. Who knows if that's true? If it is true, that's really not going to look good on TFue, because that's just going to show you, hey, man, like that's not how life works. Like you can't just back out of a contract because somebody offered you more money afterwards. Like you kind of have to deal with it, unfortunately. But the second thing is that he wanted to know, and this was a question specifically for you, Josh. He asked, like, if they're independent contractors, players, how does that A, change a contract situation, and B, are the contracts stable if players are independent contractors?
I'll preface all this by saying nothing here is legal advice, right? We're just chatting. And every situation is going to be very different. The short answer to the second part of that, and I'm not sure what you mean by stable, but, you know, in terms of job security, which is what I think you're referring to, is it's just that you have a contract for a defined period of time. If after 1 year, you know, you're not competing as hard or you're not earning enough, and, you know, you don't warrant that that salary or that payment, then yeah, they let you go. On the flip side, if you're someone in TFue's situation and you're on a 1 year contract, that 1 year pops up, you say, hey, I just got an offer for a buttload of money from HyperX, and I can't accept that with you guys. So either you need to change my contract or pay me that buttload of money. So, you know, it is kind of that double-edged sword. What was the first part of the question? Sorry, I don't.
No worries, no worries. He wanted to know if they're independent contractors, how does that change a contract situation versus being an employee?
Oh, that really just goes back to what I was saying earlier. You know, if you're an employee, you get taxes deducted, you have workers' compensation, or, you know, employment insurance, unemployment insurance, whatever you call it, Social Security, kind of all those deductions that you see on your paycheck as an employee. As an independent contractor, you know, if I'm the team owner, I say, here's your $200 even. You deal with it. That's kind of the short answer there.
Yeah. So it's a lot less headaches essentially for the team itself.
Yeah, exactly. And frankly, you know, it's probably more appropriate. I don't know if many team members could be considered employees. That's just an opinion, but anyway, we don't have to go down that road.
That's fair enough. And I think FaZe Clan actually kind of alluded to some of this, to Adamant Gamer's first point. Like, I think they actually alluded to some of this in one of their tweets. Do we have the second graphic that they had there? Right. So in every corner of sports and entertainment, deals are made based on the perceived value of the talent and the opportunity at the time of the signing. If talent starts to show, talent starts to show a dramatic improvement in value, it's a common practice to renegotiate based on that new value. This happens in sports, music, film, TV, and certainly now in esports and gaming. FaZe has made every effort to respond to TFue's massive success fairly and accordingly. So they say that in the last several months, we have encouraged and supported any FaZe member interested in hiring a third-party manager and/or agent. they know that the industry would benefit from increased professionalism in every aspect of representation, and that the last is just a little like we thank our fans and stuff. Now I can't remember where I saw this, but I believe they've said maybe it was in the actual suit itself. No, it couldn't have been, because that would be from TFue's side. Shit, where did they say this? That they said that they have reached out. Maybe it was in Dear TFue, that YouTube video that Banks came out with. But he said that they had reached out to TFue's people not once but twice, and been rejected in terms of they had gotten no answer, and trying to renegotiate the contract or settle disputes. Does that sound like, is that plausible?
This is where I have, and I'm glad you pointed that out. I also saw that. I think it was in the Banks video. This is where I have sympathy for TFue, because I don't want to start to, guess on his reasons for doing all this. But I suspect, and this all smells of, a team of lawyers and agents, and it's nothing against them, who see an opportunity for a test case. And that is something that really needs to happen in this industry. You have a player who is high profile with an opportunity that warrants this type of renegotiation. That was likely going nowhere, and litigation was used as a threat, and ultimately they moved on it. I would say people threaten litigation all the time. If you're a lawyer in just about any other industry, or certainly the insurance industry, it's not uncommon by any means to be served with a lawsuit. What we have here, and I should add that this isn't the first esports related lawsuit by any means. There have been other cases where players are taking team owners to court and saying, hey, you haven't paid us, or sponsors, we've done them. But the point is, you needed somebody who was big enough to warrant the type of attention that they got.
Right.
So I suspect that there was somebody at some point whispering in their ear and saying, you know what, this is your opportunity to really, capitalize on the fact that these negotiations, are not going well. Maybe we can win over the press and public opinion and see what happens. I'd love to see TFue's kind of emotional response back to Banks. I don't think we will by any means, mostly because his lawyers are smarter. But that's kind of what I'm smelling all this. And just to add one little line that caught my eye in the complaint, and this has been repeated in a lot of the articles after, is that the complaint claims that Tenny suffered, quote, permanent disfigurement to his arm during the skateboarding stunt. And even that type of language, right? That's legal language. That is personal injury language. Permanent disfigurement is a legally defined term. But the use of that language, when you put that out into the world and release to the news and say, look, he suffered a permanent disfigurement to his arm. I'm picturing his arm, bent backwards, bone sticking out.
Yeah.
A cut is a permanent disfigurement. So I don't, and absolutely. I mean, maybe not legally, but
a scar, any type of
scar,
exactly, right?
A scar, right? Not a paper cut. I'm exaggerating, but the point being, a permanent disfigurement, just because it's a legally defined term, that might evoke some emotional response. You see the PR team, the legal team, or whoever it is that's leaking this, really highlighting things like that.
So this could have just been literally him falling off his skateboard, which, if he skateboarded for a FaZe clan video, I'm willing to bet some money that he skateboards in general, or at least did prior to all this, meaning that, I'm sure he's fallen and gotten, like, I know a lot of skateboarders. All of them are messed up in one way or another in terms of what they've done to their bodies. They've either gotten a bad cut, they've broken a bone, if not multiple bones. Sometimes they've needed surgery. Like, skateboarding looks cool, kids, but, make sure you got the skills.
And you've seen the videos that Banks posted in his reply, right? I mean, clearly he's not the type of guy who's afraid to jump off a bridge and do a flip and, go skateboarding and make videos. And that's fine. You're entertaining. You should be doing that. But with that comes a risk. And you're not going to necessarily win by suing your, I almost said employer, your agent, your team. I don't know.
Yeah.
Suing.
Now, how legally would they even prove, like, would they have to have actual evidence that FaZe Clan said, hey, we want you to do this specifically on a skateboard and go out and then you fell doing it? Because Because to me, it's, a lot of content creators, especially the ones that I'm friends with and know, even if they have relationships like this, the organization kind of relies on them to be the creative drivers. Like, that's what they're there for. They're the ones who come up with the ideas. They know their own brand and themselves best. They're like, I think this would be really fun to do, or this is how I want to do this. And the organization just says, yeah, go for it. Or here, what do you need? A camera? Like, you need a guy following you with a camera? What do we got to do here? And at least in my experience, that's the relationship. So how would they prove this?
Well, I mean, if we're talking just the skateboarding or permanent disfigurement, you get into the whole realm of personal injury, and was there a duty of care that the team owed to TFue, and was there a breach of that? Were they negligent in allowing him to injure himself? And then from that, did he injure himself? Was it a result of them allowing him to do that? And then how much, in damages is that worth? This was almost added as an aside in the lawsuit, right? If this goes to trial, nobody's going to go down that whole personal injury route with medical experts and proving that an injury came from this and this is the value. That's not what all this is about. The easiest way really for TFue to win is on this argument. And we haven't touched on this, and I'll say right now, I operate out of Ontario, so I can't really comment on California law, but the real allegation that they had was that FaZe violated California's labor laws, and particularly the Talent Agency Act. And, without going too far into it, the allegations, if proven true, could, by reason of the fact that they couldn't enter into this contract in the first place, just void the whole contract. In which case, TFue could then go on to HyperX and get his buttload of money. So that's kind of the easiest way out of all of this for TFue.
Okay.
Is to prove that.
So what that sounds like to me, though, is that would, I mean, especially with, a lot of esports teams, I'm assuming that most of those teams use very similar contracts and language, right? Yes. That would kind of completely redefine a lot of the current, a lot of the esports contract and how they're done. And it would almost give any player who is currently signed to a contract a way out if they wanted it, because they said, hey, they could just say, hey, look, my contract's so similar to this TFue guy's. If his is proven to be void, then mine is too. Yeah, I mean, it will change the way organizations draft their contracts 100%. One way or another, I think this will show that there's a spotlight on it. It's now grown to not just the esports world, but outside of it, right? It was trending on Twitter. It's I've seen CNN, I've seen there are other news sites picking this up. So that alone will result in a culture shift, or I hope it does. In terms of that specific law and allegation, we would have to hear what the courts have to say, because there are a lot of definitions in the statute that are questionable whether they apply. And that's not to say that they were wrong to bring it. It's that we genuinely don't know because they haven't been tested by the courts yet. So if the courts see that as being a problem, then yeah, you're going to have a shift, because many teams bring deals to their own players. That's not uncommon by any means. So it is, that will be interesting to see how it goes. But again, that's limited to California. And, that can only take you so far in an industry that's very worldwide. Yeah, absolutely. Do you have anything to add here, Throoper? I feel like you've just kind of been listening in for the last little bit.
I'm trying to learn as much as I can, honestly. That's the whole thing. We have the unique ability right now to have an actual somebody who studies in litigation on here to kind of try his best to at least make sense of all this, because I know everybody, a lot of people in the community are going to be pretty confused for the most part, since also we don't have all the information either, so that makes it even harder. There's just a lot of speculation at this point.
And that's what it is. The litigation process is all about discovery, is what we call it up here. And that's that, both sides are showing their whole case, and it's going to be a matter of public record. And I can bet my salary that this will not go to trial, and it will settle beforehand, because people don't want that information out there. And whether that's TFue realizing that, hey, this might not have been such a great idea, or FaZe realizing, what, they might have a point with this whole talent agency bit. It's easier to just pay it off and make it all go away and sign your NDAs, and we're going to move on to the next gossip that happens next week. But But one thing that I will add with FaZe Clan's response, I was just kind of going through his statement here, and it's interesting if you look at his reasoning. None, and his being Banks, none of these reasons actually refute what would be a defense to these allegations. So he's saying they've never collected on the contract clause stating that 80% of earnings from a brand deal brought by the organization. So he's saying, again, it might say 80%, but we've never taken that money. Irrelevant to the talent agency conversation, irrelevant to the is 80% unconscionable question, irrelevant to the other allegations, personal injury and drinking and all that. Defense number 2, Tenny's deal was crafted by a previous legal team. Also irrelevant. We hired previous lawyers. We didn't like them. Now we have new lawyers. Great, right? Ultimately doesn't matter. Defense 3, organization's new contract since last summer cap FaZe Clan's take at 20%. Sorry, that was poorly worded because I was reading it exactly. But instead of 80%, they're saying they now take 20%. Great going forward. But if TFue still signed to this contract, doesn't help them. The last point, as we kind of already talked about, is that they've been working to offer an improved deal since September, and that's really the only part of that speaks to me as providing any defense to this. But even still, just because they've been negotiating doesn't mean that they were in the right.
So it almost sounds like he just basically made an appeal to public opinion rather than an actual defense.
Yeah, and frankly, I'd say it might have worked. I mean, there's a lot of people coming to TFue's defense, but at the same time, you got a lot of top people saying, like, buddy, what are you doing? You're making money. You're a rising star. Don't poke the bear, so to speak. Even if it needs to be poked. Don't get me wrong. There are a lot of gamers who are in very bad contracts, and I've seen them, and something does need to change. But was this the right moment for it? I was hopeful it was when I first heard about it, but now I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's
yeah, I agree.
It's interesting because obviously when you've got a brand that big, you've got to be careful because other brands, big like a brand as big as TFue, you've got to be careful because other brands might go, well, wait, is this guy going to try and litigate us over something in our contract? Unless we maybe if it's a gigantic brand like Samsung or HyperX, they've got like a building full of lawyers, right? They can be confident that their contract is ironclad. But for smaller esports organizations, like, good luck working with Optic. Good luck working with Cloud9. Like, you better hope your brand can keep its popularity soaring because, the esports industry is a very small room. Like, you can fit most of the people who actually matter into one stadium, no problem. So to kind of burn somebody in that building is generally not the best move, which, I mean, like you said, that has its disadvantages for players because it has kind of stopped people from stepping out of line and maybe raising some of these concerns when they're necessary. But it's a risky move by somebody like him.
Definitely.
We had another question here from Kuba. How will this, if at all, impact FaZe Clan's capital market valuation?
Well, this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. The investment community has been very bullish on esports, meaning they see that there's going to be a lot of growth. But again, these teams are valued very, very high. And it's not just FaZe. It's, anybody who's going through capital raises, which is just about every team right now, if they're not already public, is valued. As I said, they're 10, 15 times revenue. And if you cut off a major source of that revenue, let me back up even. Organizations and teams, if you think about the ways that they make money, there's sponsorships, there's through players, and then there's just assets you own, right? But a small team isn't going to own, a venue, for instance. So it's really just sponsorships and your athletes. When the sponsorship dollars are really focused on TFue, where HyperX is going to pay them buttloads of money, them being content creators, to represent their products rather than paying a team, how else do teams make money to justify that 15 times valuation, to justify people like Drake and Scooter Braun and The Weeknd and all these celebrity athletes who are invested in esports not just through money but through their own brands and their following. So how do you justify all that if there's no revenue coming in the door? So short answer is, if this lawsuit goes TFue's way, then it's going to be very bad for FaZe's valuation because, I think people start to realize that the community, the esports community, is not your traditional sports community. And when a lawsuit drops like this, you're going to have a reaction online that's swift and emotional and unpredictable.
Yeah, definitely. And it's kind of, it almost gets back to what we were discussing a little bit earlier when you were talking about the franchising, because I think like the reason some of these teams, I mean, I've been around esports for a while. I know both of you guys have as well. Like this wasn't really, people weren't talking about valuations this high only a couple of years ago. I think what's really kind of kicked all this off was the franchising of the Overwatch League and League of Legends and then Call of Duty now, which, you're basically going to these organizations and you're saying, hey, Blizzard is saying, hey, I want 10 or $20 million for a spot. Somebody like Hex, who's like, dude, what do you do? $10 million? What are you talking about? And it's almost, I understand it from the developer's point of view, but it is, this is kind of my own personal opinion on it a little bit, but it's a little, it almost feels a little bit snaky. Like, hey, if you guys don't pony up this money and go convince some big time investors to give you this money, we can, because there's some really old people with a ton of money who don't necessarily understand how all of this works, and we can get this initial cash in, right? The long-term success and future of geolocation and franchising and all this stuff, this is not for certain. It is not this thing that's 100% set in stone. Now, I think it'll succeed. I hope it does. I really want esports to continue to grow and turn into traditional sports in terms of size and reach and respectability and and professionalism, all this sort of stuff. But it's no guarantee. But that initial stance when all of a sudden, hey, you need to pay us 10 to $20 million or we'll find an investor who can, and that guy's going to have the team, and Optic Gaming can disappear into the ether because it's not going to be allowed to have a team in this big prestigious league. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that developers have an insane amount of power, and in the franchise systems, they hold all the power. But it's like you said, it's not by any means guaranteed to be the best way. If you are an investor into Overwatch, you better hope that Overwatch sticks around. Blizzard says that you're investing into the IP. They might have another game that involves the same characters. Ultimately, though, you're betting on Overwatch, and I think you see that now with the COD slots that just got released. And I know we're getting a little off topic here, but Activision released their COD slots, and the teams that came in, they're the same teams that are in Overwatch with the same ownership groups, but they're still paying another $30 million for each team, $35 million, whatever the number was, for that right to the franchise slot. So, right. If I'm Activision, I'm saying I don't even care about how well this all does. Let's just keep coming up with games and sell franchise slots for $30 million a pop, and make our shareholders happy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have another interesting question. So essentially, this is from Envious Echo. He wanted to know if orgs really give popular players like TFue more sponsorships than he could get alone. Now, he has a caveat, especially with how popular he is now. Are there a lot of benefits to him getting out of his contract then? And we briefly touched on this, but I think this is an important point to kind of discuss for a couple minutes, because, when you're at TFue's size right now, like look at Ninja. Ninja's a great example for this. Why is Ninja not on any organizations? Because he made himself, he became gigantic, and now there's absolutely nothing an organization can offer him. But TFue was not in that situation. TFue, at the time of signing this contract, was for all intents and purposes very, very small. He had very few viewers. He was on no big brand's radar. Nobody wanted to give him a ton of money. Then you inject something like the FaZe, Optic, like Cloud9, TSM, pick your giant organization, and they send out that tweet. Hey, everybody, follow this guy. Follow his social media and his streams. He's our newest member. We want to show him love. Some of these teams have done a fantastic job of building a loyal fan base of people who are ride or die with that organization, which is crazy because it's not even like they're located in a specific sport city or anything like that. They've just, through their brand, they've built this really hardcore following. They then give this player a kickstart, sends them up, and like I said a little bit earlier, way easier to get from 1,000 to 10,000 viewers than it is to get from 0 to 1,000. And they basically push you straight to like a couple thousand off the bat for free. And then obviously you have to be entertaining. You have to be a good or talented or what have you to continue to retain and grow that audience, but they give you a giant initial bump. So what do you guys think on this exactly? Like, do the orgs help the players? Like, at what point, where's the tipping point there for when a player maybe doesn't need an org or still does need an org? And how can a player spot that difference out?
There is a tipping point for sure. And, to FaZe's credit, they're really a group of content creators, right? Ninja is a content creator. These are not teams like, Toronto Defiant would be a team. So that's their purpose. They are there to help build brands. And, when it's done right, TFue waits out his contract. And that's the other thing. I have no idea how long was left on this contract. They're saying they're in negotiations, right? That to me suggests that this contract's almost up. So wait until the contract's over, find your new organization, or take advantage of the fact that you've just built this brand and start your own Team Ninja. Go hire Jessica Blevins to manage you, and then you can take all that credibility that you've built up and put it to yourself. But now we're kind of left in this limbo where you're with an organization that you don't want and doesn't want you anymore. You have to find a new organization, or you have to build up your own brand. But again, you have to deal with, the fallout of all of this. Hopefully the HyperX deal is still there, but, we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah. This is Adamant Gamer has kind of given us another little comment here, and this is something I vaguely remember too. I think it was 6 months in or a year in, and 6 months in, and then a 3-year extension. And considering he signed it in April of 2018, that gives him, another 2.5 years. Or yeah, I did the math on that right, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So with enough time left over, then maybe it is worth taking this risk. It might just be worth breaking the contract at that point and doing the thing for HyperX. Oh no, I shouldn't suggest that by any means. Sorry. Well, since this isn't live, is it?
Remember, guys, nothing here is legal advice.
Nothing here is legal advice. You'll put that as a disclaimer, right?
Yes.
No, but that's just it, right? Okay, so if there's 3 years left on the contract, then realistically, that's your career as a gamer, right? If you're going to make the move, then yeah, now could be the time. But again, you have to, really weigh the risks on this one, because now you're left with another 2 years in a contract that you're arguing is void in the first place.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We've kind of circled around a whole bunch of stuff here, but was there anything from the actual, litigation filings themselves, because those are now public? Anybody can, read that document. I believe it's like 26 or 27 pages, 23. Okay, 23 pages. Is there anything in there specifically that really stood out to you as like the key things or some key points of either discussion or contention in the lawsuit that are going to be, what this whole thing boils down to? I know you already mentioned the one, but is there anything else that we haven't touched on yet that you think is like really worth noting on and paying some attention to?
I think that one being the Talent Agency Act, is really the focus of this. The rest of it, all I'd say is, when you read these complaints, they are drafted very one-sided, as they should be. You're encouraged to present your best foot forward, but you have to really read it with that in mind. And I think that the swift reaction on the part of FaZe has at least, moved the court of public opinion away from, okay, everything that they say in this complaint is 100% true, to, all right, there probably is more than this. But, just be cognizant of the wording. Like I already said, words like permanent, disfigurement are there to evoke emotion, or because they're legally defined. They're not there because, he had a bone sticking out of him because Banks, threw him off a roof or something. So it's just, you have to read that with that in mind.
Okay. I mean, the one thing that I really wanted to kind of ask you about, because I find it strange that, and I think we've kind of touched on this, but I haven't really gotten an explanation for it, is why would there be terms in a contract that you're not collecting on? So like FaZe constantly says, hey, we've got this split. Maybe that is the split, but we're not taking any of the money. We're not taking it from him. What's going on there?
I mean, frankly, that could just be a business decision. If it's a little bit of money, I've certainly done that with our clients. If you're finally getting that first $1,000 contract, I'm not taking $150 from you. That's a smaller amount, but could be the same reason. It might just be that they wanted to keep things unofficial, and that's something that will come out in this lawsuit. When you have one thing in a contract, one breakdown in a contract, and repeatedly ignore it and break it, there is an argument to be made that that provision is waived, meaning that we never really abided by it to begin with, so you can't just abide with it 3 years down the line. So why is it in there in the first place? I think it's standard for teams to include everything that they can under the sun. When you're in negotiations, it can be a contentious process, so you want to keep as much of your power as you can, and the other side's going to do the same. But when you reach that agreement, it's supposed to be a compromise, and at some point, somebody had the ability to say, that 80% figure is way too high, or we are encompassing too much into this 80% bit. Because I guarantee you, if you put that contract in front of any 20-year-old now who's, your standard kind of maybe 1,500 followers and just playing Fortnite for the fun of it, they'll take a look at it, but generally you're going to be too excited to be signing with FaZe to even think about the ramifications of 80% cuts of one small part. So I think that all goes back to what I was saying earlier. Anybody with a contract, but if we're talking here, any gamers with a contract have somebody read them over.
I'm willing to bet that even just get the high of thinking of how it's going to work out when you sign with a team like that, you might even read 80-20 and think, oh, I'm going to make boatloads of money with FaZe. That's fine. I'll be okay. People actually have a hubris like that, which is unfortunate because that's the clout that a lot of these orgs carry, where they can kind of, get, not like they're praying, but essentially it takes advantage of weaknesses of the players where they really are looking for an org. And if any of them that have any sort of brand recognition come along in the esports scene, they're going to want to try and legitimize themselves by siding with them.
100%. I mean, 17-year-old me, if I was given two options to work retail at Best Buy when I did, or move out to California, play video games, do what I love, go out skateboarding and drinking, and have fun, and that means that I'm only taking 20% of my money for a couple of years, that's a decision that I might be okay making. Yep. And it's not till after the fact that I'm successful that it's oh crap, look at all that I signed away, boy, that was a mistake. But again, he's 20. This isn't a 16-year-old, this isn't a 13-year-old as also came out. He's a grown man who made decisions and probably had a legal team behind him. So, I only have so much sympathy for that. Yeah,
no, definitely. It's one of those things where it's contracts can obviously be bad, but especially after a certain point, once you're 20, like you said, if you don't read them, it does. At a certain point, you do have to take onus and responsibility for your own decision, right? And if the HyperX thing is true, it does. It would make this whole thing very weird because it's not, you don't get to just throw a contract into the paper shredder because something way better came along now that you're way bigger, when the reason you're in this place to begin with, there is an argument to be made that the whole reason you're here right now is because of the people that you're trying to throw away. So it's a tough one. So I think with that being said, we've kept you here for about 50 minutes now. I think I just want to wrap this up with your final words of advice for players who are in similar organizations, maybe organizations that are dealing with players. If you have any kind of words of wisdom for some of these guys and what they can do to make sure that they don't end up in FaZe Clan situation or who ends up in TFue situation.
I think more than anything, this just shows the importance of a well-drafted contract, an agreement that is actually beneficial to both sides, and that can be negotiated well. And that only happens if you are either retaining or finding a lawyer or someone who is vaguely familiar with contracts to look this over and point out those 80% bits to you. And on the organization side, to seek that legal advice and get properly drafted contracts, and to know what you're getting yourself into, because we are dealing with an industry with a lot of unknowns. And frankly, it's worth it for organizations to take a little bit of risk on this stuff until we get some clarity on it. So, gamers have to look out for themselves, organizations have to look out for themselves, and all the while we'll wait while the backbone of esports continues to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. So I lied. Another question came in for you directly from chat, specifically aimed at you. So I would hate to leave somebody wanting. Essentially, what they want to know is this is apparently a first-year law student, and he wants your advice for getting himself into esports law.
Network. There's a lot of great lawyers who practice in the space. Very few firms that are dedicated to esports, so it's hard and it's challenging to be a dedicated esports lawyer. But certainly, esports falls into the category of any type of law, pretty much, right? Like I said, we do corporate law, we do litigation. There's IP issues. We'll see after this, criminal law, regulatory issues, right? Esports is really just a sector, and to that one particular law student, go be a lawyer. Go kind of get that experience, and if you love video games and love esports, and you find a way to work in it and network with people, give me a call.
Awesome. Finally, I know this is very unlawyer-like for this to happen, but I do want to ask, who wins?
It depends. No, who wins? Again, it'll settle. We're not going to see a decision, unfortunately. That's my guess. Okay. But hopefully the esports community wins. Good for the realm.
Good for the realm.
Yes.
That's what we're all hoping for. But we'll see. Right, like I said, this could blow everything up. Yes. May he rest in peace. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, spoiler alert.
We're past that point now, right? We can talk Game of Thrones. Just a side note, by the way, while I'm here and taking up the last few minutes of your time, I totally missed the Game of Thrones finale. I was at a wedding at the time, so I was on a social media hiatus when this story broke, and it took one of my friends who was just discovering esports sending me, this guy Slasher on Twitter, he's talking about law, and sends that off to me. And you don't understand how big this is, but I still can't look at social media until I watch.
Yeah, definitely not. You can't have that ruined for you. That's it. All right, Josh. Well, we want to thank you so much for coming on here and breaking down all of this for us and educating us and the viewers and everybody else who's going to watch this later on, not only like the situation itself, but a little bit of esports law. And it's always great to hear from somebody like you and kind of really learn something new. Do you have anything that you want to plug? Now is the time, my friend.
Gamers, we will offer you no charge pro bono contract review. Give us a call. Shoot us an email, Twitter DM, mkmesports.com, at mkmesports. I'm at jmarcus45. Feel free to reach out. Any questions? We're always happy to help out the community, especially.
Well, I've worked with Josh in the past, and they're great guys. So I can vouch for them.
I'll take it.
No problem. All right. Well, thank you so much, Josh. We really appreciate your time tonight, and all the best. We'll talk soon.
Take care, Josh.
Bye-bye.
Take care.